I'm Chance Dorland, and this is the Spurs Insider, our weekly NBA podcast from ExpressNews.com. Joined now once again by San Antonio Express News sports reporter Tom Orsborn. Great to have you back here on the show, Tom, because what a time to be talking Spurs. Still reeling from that 128-89 loss to the Timberwolves, which is now their most lopsided defeat of the season. Your move, Tom. Tell me about it.
Yeah, and it was the third largest defeat, third worst defeat in Spurs history under Greg Popovich. Dating back to the late '90s. So yeah, it was a tough loss at the end of a long 4-game road trip for those guys, and they finished it, Chance, 2-2, which
yeah,
is,
I mean, we talked about this a little earlier. This has come up in recent episodes. It could have been worse.
Yeah, it could have been worse, absolutely. But they beat a very bad Bulls team by 1 point, and then they get just totally embarrassed against the Timberwolves. So, on the surface it's 2-2, but if you look a little bit deeper, it's not a good trip, But the record's the only thing that matters. So they finished at 2-2. But still, there's so many things to worry about with this team, and it goes back to primarily the lack of defense. And then, when they can't get LaMarcus Aldridge going offensively, it's you can 100% chalk it up as a loss. So those two things have been bothering them from the beginning, and it's still something they've got to try to figure out.
Yeah, we can jump into a little LaMarcus Aldridge talk a little bit later on, but if I recall correctly from a story I read this week on expressnews.com/Spurs, aren't they something ridiculous when he scores 20 or more points and then very bad when he doesn't?
Yeah. I think it's like they're 9-0 now when LaMarcus scores 20 or more, and it's the barometer. It's the clearest barometer of success or failure for this team. You just watch how he's going, and if he's not getting it going offensively, then you got to worry. You really got to worry. And this team, when they're down at halftime, they also lose. When they're down in the third quarter, they always seem to lose. So those barometers, you can look at them and pretty much figure out as the game's going on whether they're going to win or lose.
All right, so we'll get to maybe talk of some other recent games, but final thoughts, a little bit more about this loss from Minnesota.
Yeah, again, it's on this 4-game trip, and I don't know if this matters or not, but it was a tough trip weather-wise. I know they're not playing outdoors, but you're just slogging your way through America's heartland and in snow and cold weather. It's gray. I don't know. I don't know if that added up to a loss or not. Of course, all that stuff didn't apply when you had a very talented team. It's the stuff that we as sports writers only seem to look at when you're struggling. But they got through it, and they're at the end of this trip. It's the final game, and they just didn't come out with much fight, much enthusiasm, and it showed up on the court. Conversely, they're playing a team in the Timberwolves that's been very, very good defensively since they traded Jimmy Butler and got Covington, the very fine defensive player, in return. So, add those things up. You also got a Minnesota team that's pretty darn good on their home court. I think they're 9-3 now. So it just added up to a loss, and a bad loss for the Spurs. But the good news is they're back home. They've got 8 out of the next 10 at home. And that may be just what the doctor ordered. They finally got a chance to just settle in and play in front of their own fans, wake up in their own bed. And I think they should benefit from it.
Get away from that cold weather, yeah. All right, well, we're going to talk a little Lonnie Walker IV, more about LaMarcus Aldridge, and, of course, look at the games coming up. But what about those other games recently that they've played? Like you said, 2-2. Any comments on that?
Well, I was in Indiana. I covered the game in Indianapolis on the day after Thanksgiving, and we go back to LaMarcus Aldridge. He had a great game that night. He comes into the game, I think he was 16 of 64 from the floor in 5 November road games. And I forget what his final numbers were, but he shot the ball very well. He shot it with a lot of confidence against the Pacers. He posted up strong, uh, just looked like a different player, and thus they win. Of course, you also have to look chance at the fact that the Pacers were down. They were depleted by injuries. Victor Oladipo was out. Miles Turner was out, a guy who certainly would have helped defend LaMarcus. So, again, it's a win. It shows up as a win, but you're playing a team in the Pacers that were without their all-star guard and Oladipo and without one of their better big men in Miles Turner. So you take it with a grain of salt. Then they played in Milwaukee and they lose there. That wasn't wholly unexpected. They're playing a pretty darn good Bucks team. And it's a back-to-back coming off that victory in Indiana. So that wasn't wholly unexpected. But then they go to Chicago and it goes down to the wire. They're playing a Bulls team that, I think they came into the game with 5 wins. They certainly shouldn't have had that close of a margin. It shouldn't have come down to that. But that's the reality of this Spurs team. They're right now they're a mediocre team, and you can't argue against that. And they beat Chicago by 1 point, a bad Bulls team. They lost by 20 earlier in the season to a bad Suns team. So all bets are off. All the things that we came to expect for so many years from the Spurs, it's kind of all out the window now, and it's just game to game. You don't know what you're going to get.
All right, so we'll stop talking about the last 4 or 5 games for a moment. Let's talk about some progress. So rookie guard Lonnie Walker IV, who was part of that week of hell of injuries a while back, speaking of bad memories, he's making some progress in his return from that preseason knee injury. Tell me about it.
Yeah, that's a bright spot for the Spurs right now. He's progressing very nicely from the knee injury that he suffered in the second week of the preseason against Detroit on October 5th. He's gone through rehab. His rehab has progressed nicely. And then right now he's met a very big benchmark chance in spending a week of practice with the Austin Spurs, the G League team here in San Antonio. They had some workouts at the Spurs facility while the Spurs were out of town. He did well in those workouts. And Friday night, he'll be making his G League debut in Austin. So he's met a very big benchmark in that he's playing competitive 5-on-5 basketball. He should be back very soon. I would figure, maybe a game or two with the G League team in Austin, and then hopefully he'll be back with the Spurs. And it's a very anticipated debut. He's the 18th overall selection in the 2018 NBA draft in June. His athleticism is off the charts. Everyone's really waiting to see what he can bring.
His hair.
Yeah, his hair. He's a great personality, a very upbeat kid. So it's a lot of excitement around him. I think Spur fans, though, need to be patient with him. He is a rookie. He's going to have a lot of ups and downs, probably more downs than ups initially. But anyway, it's a ray of sunshine for this team that's gone through such tough times of late.
And back to the topic that we've already hit a couple of times, and just like the 10 minutes we've been talking on today's episode, a little more talk on LaMarcus Aldridge. His season marred by subpar play on the offensive end, but you think the Spurs need him to return to form, like we were talking about, to have those 20-point or more games if they're going to have any hopes of making the playoffs, which is important, of course. Spurs make the playoffs, but they have that record.
No question. And, Chance, he acknowledged before the season started that the Spurs would need the LaMarcus Aldridge, who was so great last year. They would need that LaMarcus to be great again if they were going to advance to the playoffs. And so far, he hasn't been able to produce. It's not because of lack of effort. I mean, the guy plays his heart out every night. He does so much beyond offensive production. I mean, he's been a beast on the boards. He's played really great defense. His leadership has been really good. He's kind of the quarterback of that defense, playing on the back end. He communicates really well with the other guys. He just can't get it going offensively, and a lot of people seem to think that he's playing the 5 position, the center position, and he's getting a little bit pushed out of the low post area by these bigger centers, and that may be contributing to his struggles. And again, he may be still trying to get in sync with DeMar DeRozan. They're both mid-range players. Maybe there's a little deferring going on LaMarcus's part, trying to acclimate DeMar to the offense. I don't know. But whatever the reason is, he's not the LaMarcus Aldridge that we all saw last year, who was simply outstanding. So, hey, the Spurs are a work in progress. I trust Greg Popovich. There's no reason not to trust him. He's one of the greatest coaches in the history of the NBA. And I think they'll get better as the season goes on. But right now, they're certainly in a rough area.
All right. Well, that's a great setup to talk about some future games. Looking at the horizon, they're playing every other day, and the nature of that schedule means no practice until Christmas. Yes.
That's a very good point. They've been playing every other day. They've had 2 or 3 sets of back-to-backs. They don't get a break until after they play at Houston on December 22nd. Then they've got the 23rd, the 24th, and the 25th off, no games. You're going to get some practice time in there, but again, you got to juggle things with Christmas. Typically I would think they'll have Christmas Day off, but you're going to have to try to get some practice time in there. But it's been a grueling start to the season. It really has. I mean, just playing every other day, playing some back-to-backs, playing with injuries. And we haven't talked yet, Chance, about Pau Gasol. It was just revealed this week that Gasol, who's been out for so long now with a sore left foot, they finally diagnosed him as having a stress fracture. So there's no telling when he's going to be back. That certainly has contributed to their struggles. He's been so good with that second unit, with his passing. He plays well when he's on the court with LaMarcus. The high-low that they have has always worked very effectively. So you couple the tough nature of the schedule with the injuries they've had, that certainly has contributed to their subpar record.
And Tom, looks like we're wrapping up for today's episode. Final thoughts before we say goodbye.
Well, on this portion of the schedule, they play 8 out of their next 10 at home. Chance, they've got some very good games for fans. You've got the Houston Rockets coming in Friday night. They're down, but still you've got that great rivalry that the Spurs and the Rockets have had. You got Portland coming in. That'll be a fun game to watch. The Lakers with LeBron James on December 7th.
Love Lakers-Spurs games. Those are great.
Exactly. And you got Phoenix coming in on.
Oh, no.
And yeah, this is a team they beat by 30 and then they lost by 20. So you just don't know how that's going to go. The Clippers come in on December 13th. They've been very good this year. They've already beaten the Spurs once out there in Los Angeles. Philadelphia comes to town on December 17th. That'll be a very, very good game, a good game for fans to watch. So you got some talent coming in, and that's always great for Spurs fans.
And that was a fun one. Big thanks to San Antonio Express News sports writer Tom Orsborn for joining me for today's episode of the Spurs Insider, our weekly NBA podcast from expressnews.com. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.